Radical common sense, yeah. Radical common sense, yeah. Yeah. Radical common sense, yeah.
All right. Welcome to Radical Common Sense. We have Diana Cantu-Reyna and Dr. Maysa Alavi. I'm very grateful to have both of you on this podcast. It's not often that we get two brilliant women with as much experience and success in your respective fields as you two have on one podcast, and especially a podcast that is called Radical Common Sense. Because I think in many ways what you're doing is perceived as radical, but at its root is very commonsensical. So thank you for joining. Very excited for this conversation. So I'll begin with just some introductions. I think each of you will be able to introduce yourselves better than I could. So Diana, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, your work, your practice, and then Dr. Maysa will move to you after.
Yeah, thanks, Asher. It's great to be here and have this conversation. I think Dr. Maysa and I are always excited at the opportunity to talk about psychedelics. And my background and training is a registered nurse. I currently work in critical care up here in the Bay Area. And also have a nonprofit that has been working towards building community within my nursing community through education around modalities from around the world that cultivate healing. And so it was kind of only natural that I was very curious about the use of these medicines for healing individual and collective trauma. And so I was lucky enough to connect with Dr. Maysa, and the two of us have collaborated actually a few times, but her and her amazing team in New Orleans, they're currently working on a phase 2 clinical trial, I believe, Maysa, is that right?
Phase 3?
Phase 3, sorry about that. With the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, and I'm sure she'll touch a little bit more on that, but her team and our nonprofit collaborated to create a psychedelic assisted therapy series for healthcare practitioners, where they were able to actually utilize and receive continuing education units towards their licenses. So really trying to bring this awareness around these medicines, talk about safety, and so I've had the wonderful opportunity to actually go out and see what Dr. Maysa is doing in her private practice, which she'll, I'm sure, talk about at length, but to really study what she's doing. And it's, I have to say, it's been so inspiring and really has shifted my whole way of approaching health and what's possible right now. So it's given me hope, and I'm really excited to be here to talk about this stuff with you guys.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Diana. Yeah. So I'm Dr. Maysa Alavi. I've been working in the field of what I call functional psychedelic medicine, and it's a new field that combines the psychospiritual with the material. So I like to address the psychospiritual with a large toolbox, from meditation to psychedelic substances and various indigenous medicines. And on the material level, think that there's a lot of value in looking at genomics and specific patient profiles including their microbiomes, their urinary hormone levels, their intracellular micronutrition. So combining a lot of what the material body is experiencing as a way to guide our treatment, and working on healing from the psychospiritual aspect. My belief system is that our physical material problems originate as energetic problems first, and then form a material stronghold. And so we like to look at both of those aspects in the practice. My background is I'm trained as a Western MD. I went to medical school at the University of Texas, did my residency at UCLA and USC. I'm board certified in family medicine, and did a lot of my early career in emergency medicine and acute care, because I saw a lot of value in that over how we manage chronic care and chronic medical conditions. And so I've always, along that timeline, been interested in psychedelics, both personally and professionally, and started out doing a lot of medical cannabis consultations and education around medical cannabis. That expanded into getting trained by MAPS on how to administer MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. That is what led me to New Orleans about 2.5 years ago. I was invited to become one of the female therapists and site MD at our location here in New Orleans, which is one of few in the country and in the world doing this phase 3 clinical trial. So in joining that team, was able to sit with participants through a 6-month therapy program that included both face time for preparation as well as experimental sessions where they received either placebo or active medicine. And after 3 of those, a finishing of the integration process, and between every experimental session doing integration. Being part of the New Orleans community, it's actually a very psychedelic forward thinking community. I've had the pleasure of being part of the New Orleans Psychedelic Society and speaking there a number of times, and on the topics of ketamine and cannabis for Diana's programs, and coordinating these groups to provide more education around these medicines. And in my own personal practice, also provide education around psilocybin, MDMA therapy, various indigenous medicines like kambo, ayahuasca, rapé, and sananga, and trying to just bring a lot of awareness to these topics, and that there is a large toolbox for healing, and every person's path is unique and different. But if we can activate that individual's inner healing intelligence and expose it to a number of tools, then there's going to be a natural inclination towards certain tools. Like, people ultimately know what they're needing, and their body is really what keeps the score and does not lie to us. It's our best friend. So if we're able to listen into that through these tools, through just practicing awareness of holistic health, then they're on the path, when on the path of healing, they're going to be able to reap those benefits for both themselves, the society, and generationally. So in my practice, I like to try and provide a framework for that, and camaraderie for that around that. It's more of a collaborative working agreement than it is any type of prescriptive or hierarchical one. So I take pride in forming friendships with my clients, who then feel safe to reach out to me about what they might not otherwise tell their physicians or their healthcare practitioners. And I think that's how it ought to be, as evidenced by how these indigenous healing societies have worked, where a generational page or healer from many, many generations down will be revered by the community and trusted, and also have their community's interest at heart. And so, there's a lot to learn from the healing traditions of the past. So in the center that I work at, Spire Center in New Orleans, I'm very lucky to have an amazing body worker in Rolfer down the hall, an amazing Ayurvedic practitioner just catty corner down the hall, and an acupuncturist across the courtyard, a hot plunge, a cold plunge, a swimming pool, a infrared sauna, a dry float tank, courses and classes, free education, a meditation room. This healing center here is truly a world-class institution, and it's literally a dream every day that I walk in here. And I have to pinch myself, because I really feel like we have something special happening here. And I had a client just today tell me, I've never seen anything like this in LA. And we were both like, yeah, how is that? There's so many healers in LA and so many people doing this great work. And yet it feels there's this feeling of separation for her that she was connecting with there. And so and great, let's take this model here and bring it to the world. And LA, I think, would be a ripe territory for bringing something very similar that's inclusionary and very thoughtful of the surrounding community, and it combines these healing modalities under one roof.
Beautiful. I think that LA would really benefit from not just one, but many of these. And I think one aspect of Los Angeles that might get in the way, but doesn't have to, is that being as expensive as it is to live here, both the rent, the certifications, the business licenses, all the things that it takes just to do business here, make it difficult for those who might want to practice in the way that you're practicing, younger physicians, younger people in the space who might not have built a history of well-paying, patients, and might not have the practice that's developed enough to spend the money that's required to build it out. And but this might also be a solution to that it's kind of shared space, shared cost, shared community, shared patience. It's totally in line with what's happening in the residential and even frankly in the office world, right? Where it's co-working is booming, co-living is booming. So it would make sense that this would begin to manifest here. So I might just touch on each of your respective bodies of work, and then kind of merge them together as we move along. So Diana, Cultivating Self, it's a beautiful name. I think a really important idea. In your mind, what do the people who have attended seminars, events, weekends, retreats, etc., get out of this that they don't get out of traditional therapy, treatment, etc.?
That's a great question. I mean, I think we're still experimenting, we're always trying new things, and curious of different modalities we can integrate. But thus far, what people are taking away is pretty groundbreaking and transformative. I mean, I have, for example, after this series that we just did, and this was all virtual, but people are really shifting and rethinking, like, what is important to me, like how can I seek this healing for myself so that I can actually hold space for my patients and show up as the caretaker and healer that I want to be, right? Like how are we going to address the wounded healer aspect and that archetype, like that we all pretty much go into caretaking roles because of that wounded healer that usually resonates somewhere. So I think people are really, this is resonating, and people are really asking those questions. And so I think for us, it's really important to just create a space for those questions in this conversation, and allow people to just jump in wherever it feels aligned in their journey. And I think that as long as we can make sure that that's available to people, and they know that they can come to Cultivating Self when they're interested in learning more about these things, that it's there. And it really has allowed nurses to connect more with themselves in these retreats that we do, and understand the importance of taking care of yourself, and the buzzword of self-care that everyone is talking about. I mean, it's true. It really is. You really have to nourish yourself, even more so when you are in these caretaking roles. So we actually have like extra work to do because of how we show up for patients and clients, and the work that myself and Maysa are doing. So I think that it was natural that someone like myself was curious about this for my own healing, and to begin with, and to really explore like what's there. So the nonprofit is really focused on making sure that that's available, that we're integrating very different. We can kind of connect with any type of nurse, like we bring in professionals like Maysa and, other teachers of mine who, can connect these like totally different philosophies from all around the world and really speak to that scientific, side of these practitioners to understand that this is scientific, but there is that mystical aspect of it as well. And we always like to make sure that we sprinkle a lot of that in there as well, to make sure people are like, okay, we really don't know, but like we can still have fun.
Yeah. And I'm sure that, especially in times like now, the psycho-spiritual, is in desperate need of fulfillment beyond the scientific. And I'm sure that burnout is very real right now in your field. And how could it not be? I mean,
Right.
So
Yeah, and physicians actually have one of the highest rates of suicide among any profession in this country. I mean, it's pretty, it is a thing. Nurses, I personally know of a nurse in this past year in my own hospital who took her own life. It's a real thing. It's people are really suffering, and we're the ones that are supposed to be showing up for to take care of everyone else. And so if we don't address this as an emergency, like this is an emergency, this is urgent. We have to, like Maysa said, we have to use the tools in our toolbox, and we have to know that what works for one person isn't going to work for someone else. We have to get out of that way of thinking, that very like modern medicine treat symptoms and just throw prescriptions and medicine at people, which sometimes are necessary, but we're not really going where we can. There's a lot out there that we have yet to explore.
Expanding the toolbox. It's a very limited toolbox from an outsider's perspective. And it's always been curious to me why people in their personal lives get to use a lot more tools than those who are in fields that could really use those tools. Maybe Maysa, you could talk a little bit about MAPS as an organization, as a vehicle for providing these additional tools, for researching them, and how you have been involved with MAPS, and whether you're also doing research outside of MAPS, or whether most of what you're doing is either funded or supported by MAPS.
Yeah, so MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. It is funded by individuals like you and I, and Dr. Bronner's, and venture capitalists, and just concerned citizens and individuals. It's not funded by any pharmaceutical companies, at least that I'm aware of. So that funding allows MAPS to then sponsor this research. The phase 3 clinical trial that I'm involved with is using MDMA for the treatment of PTSD. And that's an FDA approved protocol. So the FDA has looked at the protocol and said this is appropriate. And it gave the medicine a breakthrough status similar to psilocybin. So these medicines have been given acknowledgement by the FDA as having this great miraculous healing potential. Or at least healing potential. I use the word miraculous. I've seen the transformation that it can create. And, for me, it's nothing short of a miracle. For those individuals going through the therapy after those initial studies have been published, it's about 67% of them don't qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD if they got the experimental medication. That sounds curative to me, in that this is like a future rating of their PTSD. It's not just right after the study. I believe it's a number of years, 1 to 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a lot of potential here. And currently, although it hasn't been given the approval to be open label and allowed for anybody who comes with the condition or a wider variety of conditions that might benefit, it's hopefully close to that stage. And right now, our group is doing crossover trials for those individuals who did get a placebo in earlier trials. They are being offered the active dose. And that's a nice feature of a trial to say, hey, you know, you had to get off your antidepressant. You had to answer these invasive surveys. You had to come to all of these meetings, and yet you didn't get the experimental medicine. In the end, you were randomized to become a placebo participant. If that happens, we'll give you the medicine eventually, as a testament to, you know, that person's continued conviction or sticking with itness. And that's really rewarding to know that I'm going to sit with someone who's going to get the medicine. It's challenging to sit with someone on placebo, especially when you've seen how much the medicine can benefit somebody. It's like, you know, there's a part of me, like the human inside of me, the humanitarian, is like, this is a waste of time. I know it works.
Yeah.
You know, why do we have to go through these loopholes? And, you know, on the other side, I understand there's safety and efficacy that needs to be shown for the modern society to allow it to be. But if you think about it, things like naturally growing mushrooms have been used for thousands of years. And you know, I think the proof's in the pudding there. You know, societies have evolved alongside these medicines. You know, we have natural cannabinoid receptors within our body. Women who don't use cannabis still have endocannabinoids in their breast milk. It's a part of us. We've evolved alongside the cannabis plant, but it's Schedule 1. You're telling me that's more addictive, more dangerous than opioids, heroin, other medications and things that have caused epidemics of deaths. You know, there's no cannabis related deaths. If someone does something silly on cannabis, that's different from the medicine in and of itself causing a physiologic death. So we need to reframe and question these labels that have been placed on these medicines and free the plants, because, you know, there's a university professor in our town who's a big advocate for this. I don't recall his name off the top of my head, but he says, look, we're going to do drugs. Humans have done medicines to change their consciousness since the beginning of time. Altering our consciousness is a part of us. Let's just acknowledge that and allow it. And let's put in the support systems there so people can use these medicines or drugs, if they want to call them that, in a safe manner. Let's focus our energy on the preparation and the integration of these experiences, the providing of a container of support and love so someone doesn't develop the addictive personality because they didn't have love in their childhood and they were clinging to whatever made them feel good. If you have a well-adjusted person who was loved in their childhood, they're not going to become the addicted personality type. So let's put in societal support systems there so that we can free these medicines and free people to have the ability to explore their consciousness. We're vilifying the exploration of consciousness. And then in some societies, or in some circles rather, we're saying, oh, it's better to get there by meditating than it is to use these tools. So we're still creating this hierarchy, but consciousness is consciousness. It wants to beget more consciousness. That's what it does. It's not a fixed belief. Holding a fixed belief, pro-life, anti-life, Republican, Democratic, requires energy. It requires you to fix an energy on a limited point of view. Consciousness doesn't do that. It's just in existence. It just is. That's what we need more of. It's not these fixed beliefs of get vaccinated, don't get, pro-vax, anti-vax. You know, how much energy does it require to defend that? Look at our politicians. They age so rapidly because they're constantly using their energy up, you know, like 7 years to one average human year. And humans are stressed right now. So that's pretty bad. And their job is about a fixed opinion or a belief. I vote yes or no. So let's release our energy from a fixed opinion or belief. Doesn't mean we can't be discerning, but we're not taking a judgment. We're being a presence. And so these medicines allow us to do that. It's beyond what we're naturally being cultivated to do. So they're tools, they're teachers. They're crying out for connection with us. I think of ayahuasca particularly. These indigenous tribes are saying, hey, we have to share our secrets and our medicine now. The world needs it more than ever. So let's embrace that. let's make these plants available. Let's decriminalize nature's bounty, and let's teach individuals how to use them in a safe manner by building community around them, so that our boys aren't going and binging on alcohol and killing themselves and using self-harm because they don't have a rite of passage, like a Native Indigenous culture that says your rite of passage is sitting with this medicine. Your rite of passage is sitting with combo. Your rite of passage is sitting with ayahuasca. You know, it's an integral part of those cultures, and those cultures are at one with nature. They are true preservers and stewards of our rainforest, the lungs of our world. So we need to look to those cultures and ask them for the proper guidance here. And I'm pretty sure they don't criminalize these things that are growing amongst them. They are forming unions and partnerships with these medicines. And so I'd like to see the same for our culture. I really would.
I love the Free the Plants movement. That's a really nice movement. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Politically, it's not a salient thing to say or do, but humanistically, it absolutely is. And that's, I think, to your point, where we might be going wrong is, why do our politics not reflect our most authentic selves? Why do politicians not reflect the humans that they claim to represent? And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we won't get into those here. But I think that the more people there are, like you both, speaking freely and passionately about these subjects, the more likely it is that people will tune in to you and hear that your words, your vibration, your message feels more real, more authentic, more expressive, more humane than the messages coming out of the mouths of politicians. And then the people tuning into that will say, wait, hold on, guys. Why aren't you speaking like they're speaking? They seem so free in their thought. They seem apolitical, non-political. Why are you so political with this? Free the plants, you know. They'll and that's what I love about, one of the things that I love about the country that we do live in, and there's a lot of issues here, but the Constitution does provide for freedom of speech, and I think that allows people like you to do what you're doing and have people find you eventually. And now with the internet, social media, these different things, I think it's easier to find you. I think podcasts are another great way. So happy to be that, even in a small way for each of you. But I am interested, obviously, in governments here, because it's easy to fall in love with the idea of free the plants. Let's bring medicine to people. Let's move our society in a way that aligns more closely with nature. Let's look at, native, Aboriginal ways of living. But then we have politics, we have government, we have what we have, and they're very slow moving. We talk a lot about how the average voter in Los Angeles is 59 years old, and only 8% of people under 35 vote. 8%. So it's no wonder that government itself is not being conducive to what you would want them to be conducive for. How do we collectively get governments to understand the value of psychedelic assisted therapy and the different kinds of therapies that you do? And how do we change the laws or regulations that are in place to free you up to do more of what you're already doing? If you could talk a bit about that.
These are great questions, because I'm a bit conflicted. When I think of voting, I think of that as I'm signing up to be involved and to agree to participate in this way of choosing an elected individual to ultimately have a hierarchical power over me. So I've grappled with this back and forth. I was a very motivated voter, met Barack Obama before he was even running. And when he ran, was like, this man's going to change everything. And I realized the practical part of me, my sister is really good at summing it up. It's like, oh, everyone's got a price. And can one person really change everything with a system in place to avoid that change? So I vote with my dollar. That's how I vote. And that's how I would encourage others to vote, whether they go to the polls or not, is your economic power is very powerful. If you choose to support sustainable industries, recycling, I think of the clothing industry. It's one of the top major polluting industries in this planet, the fast fashion world particularly. Now there's this huge movement of like, oh, is it grown organically? Okay, is it dyed with plants? Okay, if not, I'm not interested, So we can support the plants in many ways. We can support with our dollar and where we want to contribute to. So yeah.
on that point though, let's go in a little further. Okay, great. I want to support Dr. Maysa's practice, or I want to attend a psilocybin assisted therapy session with D. It's illegal here. I can't. I want to spend my dollars, but it's illegal for me to spend them in this way. Obviously there's roundabouts in certain loopholes and stuff. Not everybody has access to those loopholes. Not everybody feels comfortable with loopholes. Not everybody feels comfortable unless it's truly fully legal. And so how do we think about that?
Yeah, that's when an organization like MAPS, I think, is really setting the pace there, contributing to them and the research that they do, I think is one avenue. The second is the concept of psychedelic churches. Not to change the subject too much, but there is a way to participate in these ceremonies. And the Religious Freedom Act is a very powerful one. And we're seeing that if an organization can form a collective, be acknowledged as a church, and demonstrate a few things, one of them being lack of diversion, having your medicine behind two locks, like the DEA would want of any psychedelic or experimental substance. Two, showing authenticity and a doctrine of principles, our respect for nature's healing power, or respect for the earth as a tool towards consciousness, whatever those doctrines are, showing actual integrity. We hold church meetings, for example. Thirdly is safety. That let's say you do have a group session in mushrooms in the context of a psychedelic church or a consciousness church, with respect to the safety, what would that look like? Making sure there's enough individuals there to provide support to those people in the experience, making sure that they're prepared in advance, they know what medications they can't be on if they're engaging in psilocybin use, and then providing them the support and the integration afterwards. And those churches, like other churches, operate based on donations. They operate based on people's contributions. So, perhaps then that is the solution that I see. It's individuals saying, not to discredit what you're doing, Asher, because I think it's wonderful to have people with integrity and heart going to politics, but this needs to become a community issue where people decide, I'm creating for myself a different reality from what everyone else is living in. For me, that looks like not publicly educating my daughter. I've wanted that since I knew I was going to have a daughter. I'm like, she's not going to be publicly educated. I didn't like what I was indoctrinated into, and I did learn so much. I'm so grateful for my education, but I imagined something different for her. And the work of Buckminster Fuller was very inspiring to me, that virtual education will get the best teacher for math to teach math to everybody. How would you not love math if you get the world's best math teacher and everyone's watching that math lesson? And how did it come to pass? I don't know. The universe will respond to those intentions. We had a couple move in upstairs. One of them was a teacher. She got laid off from teaching English to Chinese children. She's now teaching my daughter and her son. And we're starting homeschooling right in our own, little backyard. So what might that look like moving forward? More kids start to join. What might that expand into is a community collective. We have space to garden. We're doing it. We're making the most of what we have in a city where people are struggling and suffering. But if we can show that it can be done, and more people want to come along, we'll say, come on, sure, great, join us. And that's the movement that I see happening, and that's how the liberation of the plants is happening slowly but surely in the West. Enough people getting together and saying, look, we're forming a community. In New Orleans, we do have a music church. I can't say that we've combined it with the use of psychedelics at this point, but I'm sure that's on the horizon, using these principles of a psychedelic church. We have formed a number of organizations that are acknowledged as churches here, with the intention of eventually being able to provide medicine ceremonies. So, yeah.
There is actually there is actually a church in Oakland. I know that they were open, I think, this year, and you can receive medicine, psilocybin, from them. I'm not sure. I had heard something about that them potentially not being open anymore, but I know that happened since the decriminalization recently as well. So it's interesting to go down that route, because like the integrity piece is a big question for me. And I think, Maysa, I've talked about this too, like a lot of the medicine that's available, like how is it being given, administered, like where's the integration piece, for these people. And I think that that's something that there's a lot of opportunity to explore in that area.
Yeah, I think just the linguistics around this is an interesting topic in and of itself. Decriminalize implies that it was criminal to begin with. And that's what we have to move away from, or just fully past. I think acknowledging, on the cannabis side of things, that people who committed cannabis-related crimes should have their records expunged was really important part of decriminalizing cannabis. But those records affected those people for a really, really long time. And so as we move into this next stage of psychedelic assisted therapies, I'd be curious to know how records of people who have been in those spaces are expunged, if they are, and whether they're given licenses, maybe the first licenses to do this stuff, maybe not the first licenses, but are they somehow brought into the system, acknowledging that they were at the beginning of this? They were the quote unquote forefathers and foremothers of this movement, willing to sacrifice everything in some cases for the expansion of it. And I think in cannabis, we have not done that. We have given licenses to those who can pay the most and who are the most politically well connected. I think it would be a shame if that same thing happened in this space. But I think that we all can be vocal about what we think is fair and right as this grows, and potentially reward those who were really doing their best to spread the message early on when it really was criminal to do so.
Yeah, I wanted to take a moment to touch on that, because I was just recently made aware of a social equity company in Oakland that is doing exactly that for cannabis. And so I think exactly what you're talking about is slowly starting to come into the consciousness that this is like a reparation in a way, and an acknowledgement of like you said, the insight that these individuals had, that they were willing to risk it all. And so, yes, I would love to also see that happen for these other fields, because they're at the precipice now where if they start to become monetized and, like you said, made available, those individuals really need to be considered.
Yes. And I hope that in some capacity, I can help with that. I hope that we can all help with that. So one of the biggest fears, pushbacks, etc., in this field is substance abuse and potentially having this be another form of escapism for people who experience the joy or benefits of psychedelic medicine and then find it to be, and Maysa, I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but find it to be the ultimate escape and fall into this as not a medicine, but as a game of sorts, as an entertaining activity. How do we do this in a way where we avoid that, where we avoid people slipping into just another form of escapism or substance abuse? And what kind of training is required? And do we have the doctors, nurses, knowledge based to help provide that training? Are there enough people in that space here, or do we need to bring those people in as well as the people who are actually, bringing the medicine into the space and prescribing it to people or whatever they're doing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a lot of human suffering. There always has been, to an extent. And there are a small percentage of people who will, take it to the extreme in that way. I think they're probably finding medicines or ways to do that as it is. So would this maybe replace something for them that they're already using in a harmful way? Yeah, potentially. Would it be maybe a better substitute? Potentially. You can speak poorly on cannabis, but at the end of the day, cannabis can help reduce opioid intake. And I think we know that opioids are more dangerous. So if you're replacing one thing with another, some people would argue you're still not doing any good, but I think that there is some utility in that, moving towards a more natural and balanced type of medicine. But the relationship with the medicine, I think, is the reflection of that person's relationship with themselves. If someone is very much self-loathing or has a poor relationship with themselves, or with their mother, for example, you can liken these medicines to that, that there may be some of those tendencies in place. And yeah, how do we cultivate healthy relationships with anything is, working on that inward introspection, because so many of these medicines are emotionally taxing in a way. I think they actually deter abuse. Cannabis abuse is kind of unusual. Psilocybin abuse similarly, it can be very emotionally exhausting to go through a trip. Now if you're using it recreationally, that might be a different story, and that's, I think, where the safety element comes in. Yes, I think I don't like the term psychedelic harm reduction. It implies that psychedelics cause harm, but I think the ability to hold a safe container is really important for people who do want to experiment with these medicines. And you'll find that there's not a lot really of abuse potential there, even with things like MDMA. In the research, we do preface with people, what are the risks and benefits? And we don't see a lot of problems with addiction or or issues where addiction, being that it causes problems with your personal life, or there's, a desire to seek the medicine or get it at all costs, there's a deleterious effect on that person's functioning. We don't really see that a lot with psychedelics. But if we teach people how to use them in a safe context, to provide the safe support and preparation, provide, the non-invasive babysitting, so to speak, during the session, so that someone can have their full experience, but safely, and then we support them afterwards, I think it'll actually reduce addictive personalities and addictive relationships with substances that do have the potential to kill, or are causing, problems with someone's social functioning and their societal value, how much they're able to contribute to society. I don't predict that we would see people just going into the metaverse of drugs and not wanting to come back because they're altered or preferring to be in the altered state, because I think these medicines awaken a different way of thinking and reduce the fear in us and create the more alignment with the intention and power of the heart. So, You know, you may see someone have really radical transformations in their belief system, and maybe that would inspire them to then, if they're really passionate about the medicine, to be involved in serving the medicine. You know, you see that a lot of times with people who become very excited about ayahuasca, and they leave for Peru, right? Then they go and then they start serving the medicine. It becomes their lifestyle. Whereas if you're doing a lifestyle of opioids or a lifestyle of heroin, it's not really that, there's not that context for it, you know, to then serve other people and be part of the cultivation of the medicine. You don't really see that with other medicines. So there's whole communities that are focused around this. And I think those communities keep each other in check. It's not to say they can't be abused, but I think we're running much lower risk than most other pleasurable experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some of the medicines, Dr. Maysa, aren't they used to actually work in healing addictions as well?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. So
Yeah.
it's interesting how there's like this fear around addiction, or people just kind of going crazy with these medicines, when actually that's what the medicine works.
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah,
eliminate.
we see that with ibogaine, we see that with ketamine, we've seen that in, you know, research with psilocybin, various other of these, you know, natural or psychedelic centered medicine. So yeah, that's a great point. It's part of the rehabilitation for addiction. Yeah.
It's no surprise that something which grows in nature free for all of us is in some ways the most regulated thing in the world. There has always been a struggle between freedom in the way that humans feel it, and freedom in the way that we intellectually think it should be. And I think the latter is more of the top down that Maysa you were alluding to, and the former is, I think, where we're going. I really believe that is where we're going. But I think that what you're doing will certainly help get us there. And so, first and foremost, thank you for your work.
And also, Asher, I just want to mention that there's not a lot of women, especially like women of like brown women, like doing this work in this field. So I mean, Dr. Maysa like really is a pioneer, and she's really bringing that. She's really bringing that nurturing element, that feminine, that sacred, divine, feminine energy into these spaces, and it's pretty magical, and I've been able to experience it myself. So, you know, really want to uplift that work that is really needed right now in the way that she's facilitating this work, because I mean, even up here in the Bay Area, I've been doing my research on ketamine specifically recently, just after, you know, working with Maysa in early November and checking out her practice there. And there's a lot of people, you know, there are ketamine infusion clinics out here in the Bay Area, and kind of interesting to see that more clinical, what sounds like a clinical kind of approach, and that, you know, so there's different ways to access this.
Yeah, and you too, Diana. I mean, both of you doing the work, and as women in this space, I can only imagine that you are going through more hurdles than others. I'll just leave it at that. I can only imagine, and I can imagine too that the funding allocated to women like you is probably not as great as the funding allocated to other people who look differently. And I read a report in The Information, which is a great publication covering tech, that I think something like only 5% of VC money is going to female founders, and yet they represent many multiple percentage of the founders in technology. And there was even a quote from a VC. There was a VC that was interviewing a female founder, and they asked It's unbelievable. They asked, do you want to ask your husband about this investment before getting back to us? And I not quote word for word, but it's basically that. And it reminds me that we just have so much work to do. But the truth is that some of that work is exactly the work that you are both doing. And that if men can subject themselves to this, and I say subject because I think that a lot of them don't see the vulnerabilities or issues that might prevent them from not asking the questions like they've asked. They just don't see them, and treatments like yours can help open them up to their blind spots. So rather than judging them or pointing the finger at them or becoming angry, I think we just have to bring them into this space of healing in whatever way that works for them, because the fighting isn't going to get us anywhere. We've seen that, and certainly not between the sexes. So just kind of all comes back to, we all just have to do the work. And so the more people that are exposed to what you're doing, the better. I do want to just touch on one last thing before we sign off here. And it is, what would you say to the young people who are suffering greatly right now? Kids as young as and I saw a report that even I think 10 and 11-year-olds were reporting severe anxiety and depression, and maybe even younger too. But maybe kids who are too young to go through the kinds of therapies that you're both practicing. But what would you say? How would you encourage them? How would you encourage parents who have kids that are experiencing severe anxiety and depression? Maybe it's the parents that can go through treatment, but how do we get through to these children who are really the beauty and hope of our future?
Mm-hmm. For me, it comes down to Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. I think it's a must read for everybody. It's teaching us to speak from our heart, because what is depression? Well, as Marshall would put it, depression is someone having unmet needs that they don't even know what those needs are. And what's the best thing we can do for someone in pain? It's not to judge them. It's not to minimize them. It's not to tell them it's going to be okay. It's not to compare. It's not to take away from their moment of pain. It's to empathize, not sympathize, but to empathize, to turn everything that they're saying into you're hearing a feeling and what unmet need is there, right? Feelings aren't good or bad. They're indicators, right? But these kids are feeling depressed, anxious, suicidal, they're feeling uncomfortable, they're feeling isolated, they're feeling alone. So what are the unmet needs there? What can we actually identify that they're needing, that we all need? These needs are universal. Those needs are probably more connection, more joy, more play, more interconnectedness, more self-connection, and the list goes on. And then of course the basic needs, they're all there, but there's these major categories, right, of needs. And so then how does one go about getting their needs met after they identify them? And that's actually quite simple. It's through making requests. Hey, Mom, I'm feeling really depressed. I'm needing more connection. Would you be willing to take a walk in the park with me? Who could say no to that? But what person speaks like that, right? We were never taught to speak that way. The language we were taught was one of emperors and rulers and kings and queens controlling a populace of slaves, essentially. And, it's identification with feelings like, I am sad. No, you're feeling sad. You are not at your core sad. So by changing the way that we speak and understanding the concept of feelings as indicators, needs is universal, and turning everything that we hear into a feeling and a need, met or unmet, learning how to get those needs met after we identify them, that's really what's going to help relieve this depression and the sadness. Maybe this kid needs some more safety. Well, what does that look like to you, kid? Oh, maybe it means they would just want to be hugged. Maybe that means they don't want people to wear a mask around them because that actually makes them scared, So that language, we need to change how we speak. And in that language, we can use our language as a tool for manifestation, to actually play our magic out. That's why they call it spelling. You're casting a spell. So what are we saying with our words? And how can we get more in tune in the language of love and communication from the heart? So we can really be empathic listeners for these children and hear what it is that they're not having met. What is the need that isn't being met in these children these days that they are feeling so down and depressed?
Beautiful.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, definitely. I definitely feel that NVC has changed my life as an adult and really reflect a lot on the ideas and identities that I've had about myself and whatnot. So I definitely agree with what Dr. Maysa has said. And I think for this topic in particular around the mental health of children really, really hits home for me as I work with in the pediatric intensive care. And, over the past year, almost 2 years, how we have seen this significant increase in kids who have taken their own lives at much younger ages, even recently. And I think, I think that what's important is that we need to be like asking questions. I think we need to not assume that we know what a kid needs, just, really sitting and asking them and listening to them. And I feel like we dismiss children so easily, and I see it all the time, and I see these toxic kind of dynamics in the community that I work with, serving a low resource community, and that's also these just cycles of abuse, kind of perpetuating. And so how can we also support parents and families in their ability to communicate to their children, and their ability to ask for support within their community, and their ability to say what they need. So I think it's about listening to the children and really tapping into their knowledge and wisdom as well, and actually just kind of getting quiet. And I really think that once the kids know that you're listening and that you actually are there and not distracted, they are much more willing to open up and share. And I think if we can just remain curious and give them time, then we're already off to a better start.
Yes, and it's likely that psychedelic assisted therapy can help the parents get into that headspace where they can then be there for the kids who are suffering, which might indirectly help those kids pull themselves out of the suffering. And so
and
just
I think Asher, I think what's important to remember too, though, is like that what it all comes back to is our need for community. Like, parents need a break from their kids too, right? They need support. There needs to be elders and aunties and uncles that can step in and be like, you go do your work. I'm here. Your kid will be safe. Your kid's going to play, and your kids, you know what I mean? You're fine. So go focus on yourself. And I feel like we've really done a disservice to so many parents in the lack of services that we offer at the community level. I mean, even at local libraries, there used to be so many more opportunities for kids to come and tell stories and learn and, really connect with each other, and for parents to have that sense of community and support. And we have lost so much of that over the past couple of years. And, even in my own city, the city council was about to cut library hours And, you know, it took all of us really organizing and showing up to the city council meeting and making a statement, and they decided to retract that. So, you know, showing up at the local level, I think, is what's really important as well, to hold our elected officials accountable and to really, especially with the health and wellness of our children in mind, as well as ourselves. Because I've seen it, you know, I've seen the changes happen, and I've also seen how the corruption, if we don't show up, that the corruption will continue to fester.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that. And I only mention what I mentioned to bring it kind of full circle back around of a message of empowerment, that parents have other means of healing and therefore helping their kids to heal if they can reach into different toolboxes, and that the toolboxes that they're being given or shown are not necessarily all the tools that are available to them. And that I would encourage parents who are seeing the struggles in their kids look within themselves and take some responsibility and participate in that together with their kids, because ultimately a government will not be the one that heals the children. It can be a vehicle for helping healing, but it will not be the vehicle. So on that note, thank you both very much for your time. I think we could probably talk for a very long time, and maybe we'll have a follow-up, because there's still some questions that I think people will have for both of you. But for now, thank you and see you soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, sure.
See you
Bye.
later.
See ya.
Aloha.
Radical common sense, yeah. Yeah. Radical common sense, yeah. Radical common sense, yeah. Yeah.